Well, hello and welcome to this, the sixth day of our virtual tour of the US presidential election. Today we've journeyed west into the swing state of North Carolina to Wilkes County, a pro-Trump bastion that turned out in force in 2016. The question here is, will they do so again in sufficient numbers to counteract the kind of communities we saw yesterday around Raleigh and Chapel Hill? And don't forget, it's not just about North Carolina. Counties like this are a key part of Donald Trump's base across the United States. We've got some great guests from the Republican Party online to speak to in a moment. But before that, Malcolm has been out and about and has this introduction to the county.
As promised, for this last stop on the special US election tour we've been on, we've traveled west in North Carolina, ending up here in Wilkes County. Specifically, we're in the county seat of Wilkesboro, a town on the east side of the Blue Ridge Mountains on the Yadkin River. The US Census estimates the population here to be just over 68,000. It's the conservative counterpoint to our stop in the far more liberal Research Triangle yesterday. Donald Trump won this county last time with a whopping 3/4 of the vote. Median household incomes here are around half the national average. The population's largely white, and there are plenty of evangelical Christians who helped Donald Trump win here 4 years ago. But before we dive into the politics, let's check out some of the fascinating history that makes this place what it is. All right, so if you want to know a bit more about this place, you come to the Wilkes County Heritage Museum and you talk to Anne Graves, or one of her colleagues. Anne works here and is a transplant originally from Minnesota, I believe. Is that right, Minnesota?
Yes, Minnesota.
Yes? All right. So tell us about, and we've come here specifically because we can't cover the whole history of the town, but this is a very important part of the history of the town.
It really is, because it imparts the history of the wood in Wilkes County. We are known for the vast forests. There's still vast forests around here, but the people came here from Scotland and Ireland. They knew how to do woodwork, and they came here because of the trees, and the wood industry started, and then the furniture industry. As you can see over here, we have sort of a replica of the looms that were used. The flumes carried down the logs from the mountains so that it was accessible not only by railroad but by truck or by wagon, and they could take them to the mills and they could mill the wood. And this is a little bit of the furniture. It's one of the first factories we had.
Here's something you'll recognize, instantaneously recognize. This is a casket.
Absolutely, and as you look up here, the Turner White Casket Company was one of the first founded here in Wilkes County and was quite lucrative. American Drew is another furniture company that started here in Wilkes County by a local family and continued on until just a very few years ago.
What's happened to industry since? I mean, what's going on here now?
A lot of the industry we've lost, and a lot of the factories we've lost because they've gone overseas. Some of the industries coming back. There are still some furniture industries around here, but this is an art. It's not just knowing how to build furniture, but it's knowing how to build quality furniture. And there are a few furniture companies still here in Wilkes County.
So this is something else the area is known for. You may know what this is, but let's ask Anne anyway. What are we seeing?
Well, part of the natural history of Wilkes County, because of the heritage and the people that came here, the Scottish and the Irish, was making liquor or whiskey, and they were very proud of that heritage, and it was something that they brought with them from their home countries. As you can see here, this is a still. Now, this was operated after it became taxable, and a lot of people in Wilkes County, many more than will admit it, participated in making illegal liquor. As you can see, this is a fully operated still, and this is what it looks like after the revenuers would get a hold of it. Because it was illegal, many people were caught, and then they completely destroyed the still. But like I said, it was a natural history, and when they decided to tax liquor, there were a number of people that objected to that taxation.
And that all leads us into this room
which
here,
leads
right?
us into racing. And one of the things that Wilkes County is very proud of is that we have a racetrack here in Wilkes County that actually was one of the first racetracks in NASCAR. And Junior Johnson was a huge participant and supporter of the museum as well as a racer. and he owned a whole fleet of race cars. But this is one of the original race cars. As you can see, it says Rhonda, North Carolina, USA. And this is one of the original race cars that Junior Johnson himself drove. Why was he such a great driver? Well, because he ran liquor. And he's very upfront about it and has his whole life admitted that his driving expertise came from driving an illegal liquor car. And many of those cars were filled with liquor and went very fast. Therefore, he knew how to drive around a track proficiently.
Now, moonshine is not just part of the ancient past here in Wilkes County. They call it the moonshine capital of the United States. It's very much a real thing here and now. And we are here with Brian Call, who runs his own legal moonshine business, we should say. So where are we now? What's going on?
All right, we're back here in the still room. This is where we ferment. We cook all of our cornmeal and convert it into fermentable sugars. Over here in this tank is 1,000 gallons of mash of ferment. And we got cornmeal, white cornmeal we use at a local mill right down the road. We got barley malt, wheat, and a little sugar in the moonshine process.
So Brian's family has been here a long time. This is in fact your grandfather's
still? Yeah, my grand
used to be an illicit still that his grandfather ran, and the family has brought it back and put it back together after it was destroyed by federal agents, and it's now part of an exhibit here at the distillery. Now, obviously, we love talking about whiskey and moonshine and these things, but we're also here to talk about this election. What's your take on what's going on? Are you a Republican? Are you going to vote for Donald Trump?
Me and my wife, we kind of keep our politics private. Okay. We just we look at both people running, and we choose who we think could do the best for the country, and we try not to mix politics and business.
Well, I'm not going to pin you down then, but have you made a decision one way or the other?
Yes.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, we're 100% one way.
Okay.
Yeah. And
all right, so you're not one of these undecided voters that we hear about but rarely meet.
No, we okay. know.
All right. Yeah. And around here, the politics are pretty conservative. That's fair to say.
Yeah. Yes, sir.
Right. You're a businessman.
Yeah.
You know, this is a considerable investment, bricks and mortar, and all the stuff you need to make this. What's your take on how the economy's doing? Is that and will that be one of the things? How important a factor is that in your vote?
Yeah, I mean, everybody likes their 401ks to do good, and but the distilled spirit industry's been wide open. We went from making moonshine to hand sanitizer. We've took like 300 gallons up to Appalachian State University to keep them guys safe during all this stuff. But our business is probably up 50% this year over last year, and we just hope everything keeps rolling.
How about the rest of the economy? I mean, are people buying? Do people have money to buy your product?
Yeah, their sales is really probably tripled out in the market for us. I don't know if that's for every distillery, but our business is booming right now. So we're way up over last year's sales, doing real good.
Do you worry about the division in the country? We're very divided in the States at the moment. It's a close election. Whoever wins, it's going to be pretty close, it seems, or certainly we've been evenly divided for years to this point. Does that concern you?
Yeah, we're all Americans. We're all in it together. We just need to work together, Democrats, Republicans, and do what's best for the working people here in the U.S. If it wasn't for the working people, we wouldn't have jobs, and we got to be taxed. They got to really take care of the people that works and not overtax them too, and that kind of concerns me. You don't want to be taxed to death because you got to be able to pay your bills and raise your family and stuff. So we took all that in consideration on who we're voting for this year.
Okay, so there's a bit of history for you there, and also a bit of a sense of the political complexion of this place. To go a bit deeper into that, and we should first of all, before I ask him any questions, Doug Cotton, who's been our guide today, and we're very appreciative of his efforts. He's put us in touch with the folks we spoke to today, and he was a very welcoming figure for us. So Doug, it's good to talk to you, and thank you again for your efforts in that regard. How do you see the landscape at the moment? I mean, obviously we flagged up that this is not a county that is likely to suddenly swing Democratic, but how do you see the picture for Republicans at the moment here?
I think we're going to do generally what we always do, which is stay Republican. I think it will just stay the way it always is. If you look at the numbers from the Board of Elections, we've got about 42,000 registered voters. And the breakdown roughly from January, I don't have the closest numbers, but the breakdown from January is there were about 8,400 Democrats, 21,000 Republicans, and 10,000 unaffiliated. And that's the number that we seem to see trending higher, is the unaffiliated. The Republican Democrat numbers have always been roughly, that makeup, but that's what we see different. So that's kind of what I say, 2.5 to 3 times the number of Republicans to Democrat. That's why it's pretty easy to say that it's going to stay Republican.
That's certainly the county picture. How conscious are you of your role on the state level? This is very much a swing state. It's very much in the balance. We visited some liberal areas yesterday. How conscious are you of your role in trying to get out the vote, and also notably persuading those registered unaffiliated voters to come your way?
Yeah, we've done a lot. The state, we stay in touch with obviously the state parties, and we have told everybody on a local level, and we've put ads in the paper and on our Facebook page and things, that it's very important to remember and vote down ballot, because I've heard people say that, well, I'm going to vote for Trump. I'm going to vote for Trump. And then when you ask them about, well, who else? You're going to vote for everybody else. And they say, well, I don't know who those people are. And so it's been very important from us, and it's come from the state, to make sure we are getting out the message to vote everybody on the ticket to vote, not just vote for one, the president race. And so that's been very critical for us, and with our speakers, and like I said, going out as we've been throughout the district, throughout the county, that's one thing all of our precinct chairs have been aware of and are telling their constituents as well.
Going back 4 years ago, Donald Trump won by a much larger margin than a Republican would normally be expected to win by in this county. What was it, and what is it about Donald Trump that appeals so much to people here?
Most people that I talk to, there's a lot of question. Now, I'll qualify this with, I can say up and down the Republican side, we don't always like his tone and tenor and the way he does things, but what everyone seems to really be on board with him is that he is not a typical politician. And for decades, I think both sides are just tired of doing all this work for politicians, going in there and nothing really changing. It just gets to Washington and it bogs down. It seems like a couple of years later, here comes another election. A couple of years later, it comes and nothing really changes on the local level. And I think that's what really has appealed to most hardworking people is, well, we do it the right way. We pay our taxes, we work hard, we support our families, and here's a guy that appreciates that. And I'm tired of lip service from all these other candidates. So I think that's what the real appeal is, or at least that's what I hear. He understands, and he's for, the little guy, so to speak.
Thanks very much for that, Malcolm and Doug Cotton. Doug is the current chair of the Wilkesboro GOP, and we will be going back to Doug in a second. We also have Shirley Randleman here with us online, who's a former state in the state legislature and also a county clerk, if I'm right in saying. Those are your titles, Shirley?
I did work in the court system for 34.5 years. I served as the elected clerk of Superior Court. I served 2 terms in the North Carolina House and 3 terms in the North Carolina Senate. So yes, you are very, very close.
Thank you very much for joining us. We also have Ian Parsons, who's from the Wilkes County Young Republicans Club, and we'll be speaking both to Ian and to Shirley very shortly. But before we do that, I just want Dave Swenson to give us a bit of context to sort of reiterate how important Wilkes County is and where it fits in the sort of political geography of the US. Dave, do you want to go ahead? And I know you've got a couple of slides there to look at as well.
Yep. Load up that slide. For our viewers, first off, we need to be introduced to a little bit of the geography. We can see that Wilkes County here is in the northwest corner of North Carolina. By the way, if you look around that map, you can see the areas that are blue last time went for Hillary Clinton, and all of the geography, all of the space, though, is primarily was red for Donald Trump. So you can see that when we learned this yesterday and in our visit, we can see that the urban areas tend to vote more Democratic, and then the non-densely populated areas, places with mid-sized cities like there in Wilkes County, tend to vote GOP. Let's go to the next slide. Here we go. This is just simply the clusters of what are called evangelical hubs in the United States. And of course, we know that they're predominantly in the southeastern part of the United States. But if you know your geography, you can see that that cluster also extends into North Carolina. And this area would be considered significantly evangelical by bend. If we look at the numbers, North Carolina ranks 10th nationally in the percentage of its adult population who identify it as evangelicals. That's about 35% of the adult population. The highest is Tennessee and Alabama, close to 50%. So evangelical leanings, evangelical perspectives weigh heavily on this area's political choices and their social choices. Let's go to the next slide, please. Here we see North Carolina's election results in 2018. Now what's interesting about this, first of all, you can see where they went. The vote was Democratic, but what you can see on the two bar charts, the graphs down below, you can see that the vote is split at about 50% Republican and Democratic in terms of total votes, but that the apportionment system, the legislative or the representative apportionment system, gives Republicans 13 seats. Now, this isn't prima facie evidence of malapportionment, but it does tell us that the way that the congressional districts are designed in this area they tend to favor probably more rural areas, which tend, again, to be more GOP leaning. Now, we can contrast this current congressional district, and the reason this is important with the next slide is what used to be in North Carolina. And the reason we're bringing this up is we had a good discussion last night because some of our viewers really didn't understand the whole idea of gerrymandering, the fact that you could pencil in a district in such a way either as to be super inclusive or perhaps super exclusive. And so if you contrast these districts right here, and you can see how they are, especially the number 12 one, the 12th district, how that was drawn. And then if we can go back one more slide, we'll go back to where we were, and then you can see how that was corrected. So what that does is it tells us, that they were held to account, somebody was held to account, they had to fix what was obviously a disproportionately biased representative system, at least geographically as it appears there. And this is now what they're living with. So, one of the questions that people wanted to know was, how is it that we allow this kind of a system to exist where one party or another party can exert so much control over controlling who gets elected? In contrast to some places like where I'm from in Iowa, where an independent commission determines what the districts are, and then the local, the state, for example, Senate must vote it up or down, but it can't mess with the districts. And that's the case in some areas. So that's where we are right now. We have a modified now congressional set of districts. that were now recently determined. What's at stake is what these districts are going to look like given the results of this next election, because it's not just the presidential election that's at stake, it's also a wide range of state offices, and that very well may determine how much or what this distribution is going to be in 2022.
Dave, thank you very much for that introduction. Shirley, thank you very much for joining us.
Yes.
It's maybe a slight distraction, but we did have yesterday people asking about gerrymandering. And so it's something that's confusing for people if you're in the UK or Australia, where our boundaries are set by electoral boundary commissions. Why does it continue in North Carolina? And do you think are you going to hand over to an independent commission? Why would the legislature want to keep changing it to really suit your own purposes?
Okay, so my honest opinion is I think it depends on the party who is in charge. And in North Carolina, we have only had 3 Republican governors. We have only had 2 Republican lieutenant governors. So typically the map that you have seen, rather than it being mostly red with blue, it would have been primarily blue with red, because the legislature predominantly has been Democratic in North Carolina. So in 2011, that is when the new legislature went into office, and it was controlled by the Republicans. So there is a system whereby those districts are drawn, and it is followed to the letter as to the most recent census. So they'll do the census this year, 2020, next year, 2021. The legislative body that's in charge, they will draw new districts for the upcoming 10 years. So, you know, they, like I said, they take the census number, they have the 13 districts, they determine how many people live in, what the population is in each of those districts. And then they draw those per county, and you have very strict rules about, you know, trying to protect smaller counties, keeping them whole. You have rules about, you know, the counties having to join each other. So there's other specifics that are in play when those maps are drawn.
But you don't see a demand from either party to surrender that privilege, or to surrender the legislature's control of those boundaries to an independent commission. You're happy with that system?
I will say this: when the Republicans are in charge, they're happy with the system, and when the Democrats are in charge, they are happy with the system. So it's always discussed, depending on who is on the opposing side. You know, they will want gerrymandering when they are not in the majority.
Okay, well, thank you for that, Shirley. We're going to bring in people's questions earlier this time. So if people can start putting their questions in the Q&A box, I'm going to hand back to Malcolm in just a second. But just as a reminder, we've got Doug Cotton, who's the current chair of the Wilkes County GOP. He's on the phone there. We've got Shirley Randleman, who has been in the legislature, both as a senator in the state Senate and a congresswoman in the state House. And we've also got Ian Parsons, who's a member of the Young Republicans. So Shirley, just to come back to you, I get the key thing is keeping up your vote. And we have seen throughout this series, we've spoken to many former Republicans who say they're not going to vote for Trump this time. And we've seen that in counties that are both Republican leaning and also Democrat leaning counties as well. Do you get a sense that there are people who, because of the last 4 years, because of the perceived chaos of the last 4 years, that less people are going to turn out for him?
I do not think so. And let me share some historical background. I was born and raised in Wilkes County. My ancestors go back 3 centuries to the 1700s. I am 61% British, just to let you have a little tidbit there. We are God-fearing people who were raised with Christian values. This area, we are God-fearing people. We were also raised to be social and physical conservatives. This region of North Carolina, many people who are native to Wilkes County are the descendants of the regulators. So, you know, the regulators were involved in the regulatory movement of the 1800s against the royal government officials. And, you know, I think my ancestors were actually persecuted by Governor Tryon. So we are independent people, and I see this when I am out and about and people ask me about our county and how we came to be the way we are. It's because of our ancestry and the fact that we are an independent people and we want to worship God and regulate and manage our own affairs. So that is kind of the composition and thinking of the people who live in the foothills and mountain region of North Carolina. That's why we kind of align with the Christianity and those candidates who uphold our moral values.
I guess the issue is that it's quite hard for many people around the world to look at Donald Trump and hold him up as an icon of Christian values.
But now, I mean, a politician can say anything. We all know that. But when he says he's pro-life, Christians, true-hearted Christians, are going to be pro-life. You know, there's different things that he will say in his campaign speeches that it rallies those people who hold true to Christian values. So, irregardless of what the politician says, whether it's true or not, the people in this area tend to align with those people who sound as though they had the same values. And I think Donald Trump sounds as though he has the same values. May not, but you know, politicians, they say what you want to hear.
Right. I'm going to bring in some questions now. So I've got, please to everyone, I haven't spoken to Ian yet, and I'll come to you in just a second, Ian. Sorry for keeping you waiting for a while. But let's bring in Lynn Maddock, who's in Australia. Go ahead, Lynn.
Thanks, Nicholas. I was fascinated by the comment a bit earlier that the independents, people registering as independents, had been the big growth numbers in Wilkes County. And I was really interested in whether they were new registrations or whether they were switching from Republican registration or from Democratic registration.
Doug, you can answer this question. You're the best person to answer this, Doug.
I think you have a combination of both. At least that's what I'm hearing. You have some that are just, they don't say that they are no longer Democrats. They just say their party left them. And then you've got, you know, other Republicans saying, as we've been talking about, I don't like Donald Trump and I just can't vote for that party. And so they switch. So I think there's actually a combination from both sides for their various reasons.
Doug, what's your expectation nationally? I mean, can you give it? It's obviously a tough and very, very competitive race, and the polls would suggest, in actual fact, that Biden could possibly win a landslide. What's your feeling?
Personally, I think numbers are just skewed in such a way that you can't trust polls, and that's really my feeling. I don't know. I think the president will gain re-election. I know. Regardless, there is a lot of turnout. And as the chairman of the party, that's what we want more than anything else. Just please go vote. And that's all we want. But we also want clean voting, registered voting, and not this craziness that tend to dominate the news and the headlines from both sides. And it just kind of muddies the water. But I think nationally, when it's all said and done, I think the president will get reelected. I'd love to be able to say really, really strong one way or the other, but I can't. I don't feel like, and people that I talk to don't feel like the numbers are telling you anything. So it's just been, you know, the media it's just been so crazy. They've lost the confidence of the people.
Yeah, okay, but you say at the moment you're saying you can't say with any certainty that either candidate's going to win. I think that's very interesting. Let's bring in Caroline Sumnall, and Caroline, I think this is a question to put to Ian Parsons. So Caroline, go ahead.
Hi. Thanks very much for joining us this evening. We really appreciate it. What do you personally like most and least about Trump, and the same for Biden?
Go on, Ian.
Okay, to address the first part of the question, what do I like best about President Trump? I'm going to reiterate Mr. Cotton from earlier. Most people agree he's not a typical politician. Now, I'm going to say also we don't always agree with his demeanor and things like that. However, he is newer, better, more or less typical than someone, say, like Biden, for instance, who spent a career in politics.
So, Ian, does that do you what are you saying? Are you saying you just distrust anyone who's had a long career in politics? Is that it?
No, not at all. Just I'm saying that he appeals because he's been a successful businessman, obviously, and he's been a refreshment to our political venue in the United States.
Yeah.
Is there anything you like about Biden?
Ian, is there anything you like about Biden?
No, ma'am.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. I see Shirley laughing. Thank you, Shirley, too.
I've got a question maybe just to build on that, that point, which we haven't raised yet, but where do you guys stand on the Supreme Court? I mean, presumably, you know, evangelicals could have been very excited about the 3 picks that Donald Trump has made, all of whom are regarded as conservative and potentially, well, and pro-life, and potentially at some point, the concern certainly among Democrats is that they will strike down Roe v. Wade. I would imagine that would be a motivating factor for you guys, or have you sort of concluded that his work is done on the court and that doesn't motivate you anymore?
Shirley.
I'm glad that they went ahead and allowed the confirmation to go forward with Chief Justice or Justice Barrett. And I think she has stated clearly that when she has a case come before her, that she will not let her personal opinions interfere with her decisions and how she applies the law.
Yeah. Okay.
And I think she will do that, as the other justices do.
Doug,
I think the court's good like it is. I think we need to keep 9 justices, and I think it would be wrong to start changing the number now just because the ratio is 7-3.
And Doug, that must be, the Supreme Court must be your biggest rallying cry. If you don't agree with Trump, at least that you can point to his legacy.
Yes.
Okay. Let me switch tactics slightly. I just want to ask about the economy. Obviously, during COVID, the United States has had a rough time. We've all had a very rough time. But how has Wilkes County done over the last 4 years? What has been Trump's economic record, if you like, Doug?
It's actually improving. Our numbers were flat for a long time, and as Malcolm said earlier in his piece, we lost a lot of our factory jobs and manufacturing jobs. They went overseas, and for generations, you know, people have done that. Lowe's Home Improvement was started here. Tyson Foods is here. You know, you have the furniture, and you have tobacco industry. It was a huge industry here, and then as it's gone away, we've moved into winery. They actually found that our soil is similar to that of the Burgundy region in France. So we've got a lot of vineyards and things coming up. So it's actually been coming back. And I think that that's the hope of the reelection of the president, is that he will bring those jobs that went overseas back here. And so we see our economy starting to come back. For a while, it was a little flat. When we lost those industries, obviously it went down, but we're starting to see it rebound.
Dave, I want to bring in you here because we were just discussing this earlier. I mean, Wilkes County is very poor by U.S. standards, but does this kind of thing matter? Is the economy and how the economy has affected people and people's motivations in this U.S. election? Have they been divorced from each other? And also, Dave, if you've got any questions for the panelists, please go ahead as well, Dave. Oh, you need your microphone on. Yeah. You need to turn it on. No, you need to switch your microphone, bottom left-hand side. There you go, we've got you.
Okay, apologize. First of all, what we learned in the last election was a lot of places that are like Wilkes County, mid-sized cities, historically manufacturing places, folks are places that were really tightly locally oriented, had a strong heritage and sense of community, that they went very, very strongly towards the GOP and especially towards Donald Trump. And we saw that up and down the Mississippi River. We saw that in the Midwest, and we saw that in a lot of places. And we see it here in Wilkes County as well. It's part of their history and their heritage. And so overall, we would expect a place like this to have sort of a mixed bag. If it had historically been unionized, for example, then perhaps it would have had periods over its time where it had some Democratic success, Democratic Party success. If it was part of an area that maybe wasn't unionized and didn't have those kinds of effects in their economy, then they tended to stay Republican. And we see that more in the South than we do in the industrial North, as well as over in the Midwest. So that those things really do matter, but they matter less now because unionization has gone down quite a bit, and the power of unions has eroded significantly, especially in manufacturing centers. And then B, that fraction of the economy that used to do that kind of work, like in this county, has gone down substantially. And so what it's being replaced with is what's going to be interesting over the years as to what becomes the new economy. Who are the new entrepreneurs? What are the new industries that evolve? What kind of people are attracted to either come to or stay in this county is what's going to probably predict their future political leanings if the county is going to grow. In terms of a question, though, I'm struck by, and I think Shirley really dealt with this to a degree when she told us her personal story, but what else is it about this county that makes it able to be so strongly GOP and significantly distinct from some of the more nearby growing counties, Winston-Salem, those types of areas? How are you distinct from those kinds of areas? And are you going to be able to keep that?
Doug.
I think we have a sense of community. Wilkes County may not be, a very large county. Geographically, it's huge. It's 767 square miles, but it's very rural. We have an agrarian society here and lots of families that have always just worked together. And it's kind of cliche-ish, but it's God and country, and we are very family oriented. We want to make sure our families do well. I know personally, I wanted my son to have a better education than I did. I want him to prosper better than I did. And that's generally the feeling here. It keeps us very close. We all get along. And I know that's silly to say, but Democrats, Republicans, Independent, it doesn't matter if something happens, we pull together, and our county generally is like a big community. So you don't see a lot of the struggles, the riots, the protesting, the things like that you do in others, because we just kind of gel as a society here.
And Doug, do you get a sense at all that your way of life is under threat in any way? I mean, we were in other counties. So Fauquier, for example, in Virginia, had signs up saying, don't turn us into Fairfax. This idea that sort of suburban liberal America was going to sort of be coming up the highway. Do you think that your way of life is secure?
No, it's in doubt, really. I guess I don't worry that it's going to be, taken over or anything. But what we see is that North Carolina has become like a stopping point for a lot of people who weren't born and raised in the state. They come here either from our military bases, they retire out, or they stay here. And we see a lot of people from up north in these urban centers who hate, for example, New York City because they've been overtaxed, or the state, and they they say it's horrible. But then they come down here to get a job, and we see them bring those values down here. And I think for us, we just kind of say, if you left that environment, why do you want to recreate it down here? So in that aspect, we do think, this is a possibility of changing our way of life because of that limiting ability to come and kind of, just kind of join with our thinkings and ideals and stuff like that, if that makes sense.
Okay, and Doug, just while we're here, it would seem to me that your values are quite different from what the Republican Party used to stand for. I mean, how would you like to see if Trump was to continue in office? What things would you like to see him do?
Well, I think the president. I mean, obviously he's a New Yorker. I have several friends that born and raised in the city, so I understand the brashness. He's a businessman, and I think we want him to just keep continuing to do what he said he's going to do. If those things, and we realize, other than executive order, it's not really the president that's going to get things done. So I think more than President Trump himself, you've got to figure out a way to get this polarization in the legislative branches. It's got to stop because it's so polarized, and that's what's really changed to where people, they would meet in the middle. You had moderate Republicans and moderate Democrats, and everyone would get along and they go vote, their party lines and go back home and have dinner or whatever. But today it is so polarized up and down the slates. That's what most people that I'm hearing from, that's what they want. They want to get things done, to stop just wasting our tax dollars.
Where do you think the ground is? Where do you see the possibility for compromise on both sides? It's the first time we've heard this from any of the people we've spoken to in this series.
I don't know. I don't know. I think I'm hoping that once this election is over, then it just stops. So many people are tired of hearing, it's Russia's fault, it's this fault, it's that fault, this person's a criminal, that person's a criminal. We're tired of the name calling and pointing fingers, only to find out after spending $1 billion of our tax dollars that it was all made up or it was all just a political ploy. That's what people are sick of. So I don't know how they will convey that to their representatives. I'm sure they have and will. I know we have. And it's going to take effort from both sides. And I just don't know how you get the legislature talking, but I'm hoping that they say, okay, fine, we've got 4 more years of this man and then he's gone. So let's get back to work. That's kind of what everyone's hoping.
Would you say the same if Biden wins?
I don't know. I would hope. I just don't. I don't know about Mr. Biden. I don't know about his health. Honestly, I feel sorry for him sometimes because he just doesn't seem connected well, and so a lot of people are saying, I don't know. But if he wins, regardless, it's got to be in the legislative branch that we get back to being one country and just stopping the crazy wasting time and money.
Thanks very much, Doug, for that. Anna Logan, let's bring in Anna. There you go, Anna.
Shirley, you spoke of...
Anna, can you lean forward to the computer a bit more because it's hard to hear you?
Shirley, you spoke of your people there being God-fearing Christians. I find it really difficult to work out how you can think that Donald Trump is a God-fearing Christian when you look at his actions, not his words, but his actions. He's been married 3 times. He's had to pay off women in the past. And he, as far as I know, he's not connected to any church. And I'm wondering how you can reconcile this with this God-fearing Christianity in Wilkes County.
Shirley.
My response to that would be, we have to compare the 2 candidates that are running for the office. And as I said before, I know politicians can say anything. And I know politicians sometimes say what they want you to believe. But I think from what I've heard Donald Trump say, he does more align with our Christian values. You know, being pro-life. North Carolina passed a constitutional amendment that a marriage had to be between one man and one woman. It went to the North Carolina Supreme Court. It went to the U.S. Supreme Court, and it was not upheld. So our law that the people in North Carolina voted to pass is sitting on the books. But then, you know, when President Trump talks, he sounds as though he does align with the beliefs that we have here in this area. And I do think that those align with Christian beliefs.
But Shirley, when you've heard the recordings about him, you know, talking about the way he would, you know, chat up women, grabbing them by the proverbial, that was the bus recording.
Yeah.
The fact that he has paid off a porn star not to tell her story about having sex with him in the run up to the election. You know, these are all things that most evangelical Christians would abhor, don't you?
I do, but at the same time, we have to compare the two candidates, and I don't know that either one of them are in line for a pair of wings, angel wings. So as I said, you have to compare the two candidates.
You think that Joe Biden is worse than him on that front when it comes to personal ethics?
The more I listen to the news every day, certain news channels, it causes me concern, yes.
Okay, thank you. Nigel Harley, let's bring in Nigel. Nigel Harley.
Yes, hello. Well, as I said in my little message, Channel 4, we're also in Wilkes County, so obviously that is the place to be at the moment. I think what seemed to come across in their piece was that there was a discerning movement among women voters towards Biden and away from Trump. And this appears to resonate throughout the various, you know, your various reports, Nicholas, that this does seem to be a very important underlying trend. And I would just like to say, listening about polarization, in my own opinion, Trump has done more to put back polarization than any recent president. Thank you.
Malcolm, can you follow up on that? I mean, I know you've been in Wilkes for a short period of time. I was fascinated by what you were saying earlier in terms of not having many yard signs out. You didn't get a sense of a great sort of political competition. So with that in mind, is there a struggle for the female vote there? Or are we really thinking about the sort of research triangle, the suburban areas in North Carolina? Is that something that applies in the county that you are in at the moment?
Certainly, it seems that the support that the Joe Biden is getting from women does seem to be heavily happening in the suburbs, and it's more a feature as you get closer to the bigger cities. I haven't detected anything here that suggests that it's a major phenomenon in Wilkes County. I would say, but it is right. I did notice, I mean, it's not that there's a total absence of yard signs here, but compared to some of the places we've been, you do get slightly less of a sense that there's this, you know, left versus right, in your face confrontation going on here. And that may just be a feature of the fact that, you know, there are way more conservatives here, and the Trump vote is pretty much assured here. So maybe that's just reflective of that, but it does create an atmosphere in which it seems less confrontational, even though the dividing line between here and maybe other parts of the country is just as marked as it is in other places we've seen. The places we've seen, though, are places where people are living side by side to some extent, and they have these differing views. So I'd be interested to know what Shirley thinks about the female vote. You know, do you detect any softening of support among women? Certainly suburban women seem, you know, particularly horrified by some of Donald Trump's behavior. Do you hear that, you know, maybe even privately to you?
I have not heard it privately to me. And when you talk about the suburban women, it appears like those are mostly reported on your more liberal TV stations. You know, when they talk about, I know in, say, Chicago, you go into the urban areas or the suburban areas of Chicago, those women are going to think differently than women in the South think. So I have not spoken with any women who are not supportive of Donald Trump in 2020 as they were in 2016.
But Donald Trump does seem conscious that he has lost some support among women. He's been reaching out specifically to suburban women and saying, look, I've saved your suburbs, vote for me, essentially. So he seems to think that there's a problem there.
Well, and this kind of goes with what Doug was saying, because, he's the type of person that just, he doesn't make notes. He just, says whatever, comes in his, sometimes I think it comes out of his mouth before his brain goes in gear. And, like when he said the other day that you had, that the suburban women should be voting for him because he had put their husbands back to work. That was not the right statement to make because they work also. So, I think I agree with Doug. Sometimes he says things that if he thought about it, he probably wouldn't say, but in the, the moment of doing the grand speeches, sometimes I think he says things that he probably shouldn't say.
Thank you for that, Shirley. I just want to bring in Ian because I think we've left you out a bit. Ian, can you just tell everyone what you do? I know you're about your role in the Young Republicans, but tell us about what you do professionally.
I'd rather not make any comments on my professional career right now.
Okay, that's fine. I understand that. Then let me put this question another way. Do you know any Democrats?
Of course, yes.
And would you say among your friends, is it? Though obviously most of your friends are Republicans. I'm just trying to get a sort of balance of that in your life.
I've got many different friends. Many different individuals I consider friends that are from all across the political spectrum that I work with and that I socialize with outside of work.
Yeah,
if that helps.
And so what is motivating you and your friends, a younger generation, to support Donald Trump?
Again, he's something new to the political landscape in the United States. Of course, he always doesn't. He comes off a little harsh sometimes, but it's just the freshness. Much like when President Obama ran, he was something new for the political landscape. President Trump, while he's from another end of the political spectrum, so to speak, he appeals to the different side, and you get about the same response, but from the other end of the political spectrum.
Is Obama somebody you could have voted for?
I considered it, but when he ran the first time, I wasn't old enough to vote.
Well, that's very interesting. That's interesting that there was a possibility. Let's bring in some more questions. Neil Fleming, you're there. Go ahead, Neil.
Hi, everybody. Much of what I've asked has probably been answered. I think I accept that Wilkes County is clearly a Republican supporting county and is likely to vote Republican and Trump again. But North Carolina is vital for Trump to win again. But I think arguably it could be said in 2016 that Donald Trump pushed the boundaries about as far as he could go. He won those last three states, Pennsylvania, Michigan, Wisconsin, by very thin margins to get the Electoral College votes he needed to put him over the line. After 4 years, do you think nationally he's maintained that support to put him across the line again, or indeed increased the lead electorally? Because he lost the national vote by a big margin.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Doug, let's put that question a different way. I mean, I know you were talking about it earlier. I know you were saying it's very difficult to make a projection. If Trump were to win, you're essentially suggesting that polls are way out again. Do you think that could be the case?
Yeah, I really do. You know, I've heard it so many times. Well, he lost the popular vote. Well, that's why we have an electoral college. So like we've been speaking, the rural areas and the smaller states have a voice just like the larger populations. So I think you're going to see, especially in North Carolina, around the triangle, around Raleigh, the capital, I think you're going to Wake County. I think you're going to see that blue. Kind of same around Charlotte, Mecklenburg County. I think you're going to see that blue, probably Asheville. But I think then the majority of the other counties in the state, which there are 100 counties, I think the majority of them are going to be red. So it's just going to be around those urban centers that tend to lean more liberally and have more transient people, have people that have moved here from other places. And as I was saying before, bringing those views with them. So I think that's why it's coming to the larger urban places.
Yeah, I mean, connected to this is a question from Louise Tarrant, who's also in Australia, which addresses this demographic trend that has to be said is pointing against the Republican base and particularly Donald Trump's base. Louise Tarrant, go ahead. We got Louise there? Yeah, go on, Louise. Go ahead, Louise.
All right, thanks. Look, my question was generated from that slide that Dave shared with us earlier that looked at the evangelical hubs and seemed to equate evangelical with lower income, lower socioeconomic classification, lower educational attainment. So my question was, is the evangelical group across the country growing? And if so, is it growing because that proportion of the population is growing, or is it growing within actually a shrinking population? So I'm just interested in evangelicals as a block, and how that's associated and how it's changed.
I think Dave Swenson can certainly answer this question, but I'd like to go back to Doug to get a sense of this. I mean, you obviously work within the party. You've got an idea of your strengths and weaknesses. Your evangelical base is tremendously important to the president. Do you think it's growing across the country?
I think that is a trend you see. I know in our area, in our county and a neighboring county, Watauga, we have Franklin Graham's Samaritan's Purse. And so we have a lot of evangelicals that are going out for disaster relief and all those kind of things. So I know in our little region, it is actually growing. You've seen a lot of people that have lost other jobs now working for Samaritan's Purse and are going out doing, disaster relief and all those mitigation type jobs now. So in that aspect, I see, I tend to see more evangelical thinking and believing that I have before. And now maybe it's just that people are no longer afraid to mention it. Kind of like, a lot of people just say, I'd rather not say, but I think more people are getting encouraged to say, sure, I'm a Christian. And there's nothing wrong with that. So I think it is growing.
So Dave, it's clearly a very strong base, a very strong sense of identity and attachment there within this county. But what's the national picture? Are these types of counties growing in population? What's the demographic trend?
Right. The demographics are, it's a mixed bag. There are places that are historically identified as strong evangelicals, but they're rapidly growing. And as Doug said, the kind of people that come down or come into those areas may not necessarily identify that way. The fraction of the people in the United States that identify as Christians is going down relatively persistently. It's not a collapse, but it's going down over time. However, the fraction of those Christians that identify as evangelical is going up. And so Christians are becoming more likely to identify as evangelicals, even non-Protestants. You have evangelical identities within the Catholic Church as well. And so the evangelical component of Christianity is going to be a factor to be dealt with into the future, even if the fraction that identifies as Christianity continues to decline.
Let's bring in Piers Reynolds, because you had a question that sort of follows this up as well. Go ahead, Piers.
Actually, my question was about the Supreme Court. I think it's been addressed.
Okay, that's fine. Malcolm, I'm going to turn to you. We've got to wrap up in a bit, but do you just want to add a few more comments before we bid farewell to our guests? And you may have an additional question there, I don't know.
Yeah, I did, and it sort of builds on Pierce's point, and I apologize to Pierce, I kind of poached it. I hadn't realized he'd asked the question. But there is and this may be too big a point to try and conclude on, but let's just throw it out there anyway. I mean, there is potentially, say Donald Trump wins again, and if he wins again without winning the majority vote, is there a problem with a governing system that might have produced a conservative-leaning court and say they win the Senate, the Republicans, a conservative-leaning Senate, that could be, very much out of whack with the majority of the population? So you have a situation, the classic example obviously is, say, California, which has 2 Senate seats and a population of, I think, about 40 million people. And then that equates to multiple other states, but they all have 2, Rhode Island has 2 Senate seats, and it's, a tenth the size of California. So I'm basically saying, is there any kind of problem with the governing system that produces that result? Do you have a concern, even if it's to your advantage right now, that things are out of whack with the majority of the population in the United States?
Doug, what's your feeling on that? And that's a sort of genuine observation. If you haven't got the majority vote, you've been able to change the system. The Supreme Court has a substantial impact on the US and possibly for decades to come, yet it doesn't really reflect the beliefs of many members of the population. And we're not just talking about the Supreme Court, we're talking about the vote overall and how that translates through the Electoral College, if he gets a second term in particular. Doug, what do you think?
Well, specifically with the Supreme Court, I think he, if you look at constitutionally, he did his duty by nominating and the Senate confirming. That was part of it. If you look at the way it's going to be, if you go back and look at Alexander Hamilton's Federalist Papers, specifically 76 to 78, I think, is when he addresses the separation of the 3 branches of government. If you read that, you really get an understanding that the United States is not a true popularity democracy, that we are actually a representative democracy. And so we vote and elect our representatives to go. And then it's up to the legislator to do those other things. And so if you go with the founding as it is, then it works as though it should because we're representatives. And so if you change that, then you're going to have to go back and really, it's going to be constitutional changes that I don't know that would ever occur. But I think for us right now, a representative government is probably the most fair that we get. And if the population changes the way they, if it's not a popular view for them, or they have the opportunity, whether you're in, Boise, Idaho, or Los Angeles, California, you have that same ability, and that is to elect a representative that speaks for your view. And I think that's set up probably the best way that it can be right now. I'm sure there are a lot more smarter people that can figure out a way to get those seemingly popular views out there. But my attitude is, if you actually look at the founding of the Constitution in the country, all you have to do is vote in or vote out your federal representatives, and it will then match your population's view. So that's why I've said from the very beginning, it is most critical that everybody in this country votes and do it legally. And I think then whatever it is, and the whole population would get behind that. It's just a matter of, you see so many low voter turnout numbers. And I don't think you're going to see that this way. So hopefully this time you'll see lots of voters coming out. And I think that's the way that's what we've been lacking in the country, is just people say, oh, my vote doesn't count. Well, I think they're finally seeing, yes, it does. You put your representatives in that believe like you do, and then it changes things. Okay. So that's kind of my view on that.
Doug, thank you very much for that. I want to turn to Shirley for one last comment. The polls do suggest that it could be as a huge electoral victory for Biden if you accept them as they are. Is that something you're ready to accept?
I would accept it. And as far as North Carolina, I am reminded of the Tom Tillis race in 2016. Tom Tillis lost every urban county in this state, and the rural counties caused Tom to win. So you can't count the rural counties out just because there's several of us and we're small in number, because we show up at the polls and we vote. So, you know, the election will be what it will be. And as citizens of the United States, we will accept whatever the outcome is, but we don't throw in the towel until the last vote's counted.
Shirley, thank you very much indeed. That's
Yes,
Shirley
sir.
Randleman. We've got Doug Cosson there, who is with us, and also Ian Parsons. It's been a real pleasure to have you with us. Thank you very much indeed for sharing your opinions. Dave Swenson's going to stay on the line, as is Malcolm in downtown Wilkesboro. And we are just going to look ahead to our last broadcast, which is going to be on Monday, on the eve of the election. And that will be at 10 p.m. GMT, 5 p.m. East Coast time. And that will be really looking back on the series that we've just run and looking ahead to the voting day. And then finally on Wednesday the 4th, we will be looking back over the results, if the results are through. Thank you once again to Shirley. Thank you once again to Doug, and also to Ian. It's been a real pleasure having you with us. Goodbye.
Yes, sir. Thank you.
Thank you. Goodbye.
Goodbye. Do stay on the line, everybody else. I'm going to turn to Malcolm and then Dave, and then we'll bring in your questions there. I found that absolutely fascinating. It was wonderful to hear all those views. Malcolm, can you just give us an overview? This is quite a contrast, I think, also to Fakir as well, wasn't it?
Yeah, and although similarly, it's interesting to hear how frank some Trump supporters are about their disappointment in some of his language and the way that Donald Trump approaches the job. I mean, we've heard that now from a number of Republicans. It's a sort of frustration, it's a disappointment. I mean, they still support him for sure, but they were pretty frank about that stuff. So I thought that's notable. We've heard that in both locations. I don't know, I sort of reading between the lines, I think there's an accept that they do seem to concede that, you know, there's at least a chance that he's going to lose the election. And that was a tone that I noticed that maybe was somewhat different from Fouquier.
Yeah, I think we've got a couple of snippets. Certainly Shirley towards the end had a slight acknowledgement of that. And Doug certainly in his comments about how close the race was. Dave, what struck you particularly in our previous hour?
Well, I'm again, every time we do this, I get to learn a whole lot about a small area that I wouldn't get to learn otherwise. And tonight was really interesting. There's a couple of things that strike me. First of all, the similarities in the conservative places are still there. The stridency, to the degree that there is stridency, is quite evident with regard to their support. Although this was the first time we heard people concede flaws in President Trump. But counterbalanced with that concession of flaws was also, full-throated, wholehearted support, irrespective of those flaws. So that right there is a contradiction that we know that the GOP is living with, and that is an interesting phenomenon that I'm not capable of reconciling. I'm going to sound like a broken record here, but the bravado that many of these places have towards their ability to, one way or the other, pull out the election at the state level or somehow even nationally, they're still a potent force in the United States. These mid-sized into rural areas that lean conservative, but they're the ones that aren't growing. And they concede in their discussion of these places that are growing, and they are blue, and the people that are coming, then those growing places tend to vote blue, and the dynamics are changing. And in North Carolina, all of those blue places that we looked at earlier on are the ones that are growing, and places like Wilkes County is not growing. And that's much the same story across much of the Southeast. Where is growth happening? It's happening in these places, and that, it may not be this election as Dante was talking about, but 4 years from now, Texas, Georgia, things are going to be, the dynamics are going to be fundamentally different. And however interesting this election is to watch, I can't believe I'm saying this, it's the next one that I can't wait to plug into.
Wow.
Yeah, I think just building on what you Dave was just saying, you've got it was interesting to hear Doug expressing concern about what the type of people that where I live they call, sorry, it's a very loud car with a bad muffler. They're concerned about the sort of the people coming from outside and the value, bringing their own values. That was clearly a preoccupation in Fauquier. And where I live, they call us the come-heres. These are the people who've arrived and they bring their sort of urban/suburban values. And there's clearly a concern that their political influence is going to be diluted over time by these people if they are politically active.
I'd like to bring in Ruth Campbell, because I know, Ruth, we managed to miss you out yesterday. So I don't know if you've got a question to join this time. So that's mea culpa for me not getting, I didn't see your question at the end of yesterday's discussion. So please do, I'm going to bring you up as a panelist if you've got any questions just now. I did find it really interesting that there was this sort of sense of community holding on to identity, and that struck me. But at the same time, as we've been hearing throughout these discussions, it's the battle for the suburbs that really matter for both parties in the immediate future. And so it's not going to be the politics of the more rural areas that are going to matter so much to the GOP if they lose and they want to go on to win the next election in 2024. On Monday night, we are going to be speaking to a group and also to a professor that talk about bipartisanship. And I think the makeup of Congress in the next 4 years is going to be critical. You have to think about the congressmen. If the Democrats do very well, the members of Congress who are left behind are necessarily going to be in hardcore Republican areas. And so that doesn't make, for softening of the current divide, the current political divide. We'll be talking more about that on Monday, as well as looking ahead to what kind of states we should be looking at during the election.
Sorry, Nicholas, I fell out when you were just asking me the question. Do I still have time now?
I was saying, yeah, sure. I was saying, I'm sorry, I apologize because I missed you out yesterday. And I wondered if I wanted to make sure you got a question in this time. So I don't know if you had any thoughts about what you were seeing earlier in the previous discussion, if we had any particular questions or any comments or thoughts.
Yes, well, thank you. My question yesterday, and it's not directly related today, but I'm still, I suppose, thinking about it, is about the distinction, if you like, between, personality and policy. Or leadership and policy. Yesterday in particular, there was a lot of focus on the lack of leadership around coronavirus, et cetera, and how that had sort of traction in the community. And yet when I look at what Biden is saying in that space, it is, we'll follow the experts. And to me, that's not a strong policy position. Perhaps it's a leadership position. So really, that's my question that I'm interested in, anyone's sort of views about whether this, whether there are real policy issues in this debate, or is it really around personality,
so Ruth,
which you might call leadership.
COVID, you're talking across the board about policy, or you're talking about specifically on COVID?
Yes, I am. I mean, COVID was, yesterday COVID was a significant one because, so much emphasis has been placed that is a significant issue that's actually swinging voters, particularly seniors. So around COVID, if you like, but also more generally.
That's a really good question, isn't it? I mean, the two points. We didn't discuss COVID once during this discussion about Wilkes. It's not mentioned at all, which I think is really significant. And then the other point is that how would you, both of you assess it? I mean, it would appear to me that this is a struggle about personality, yet we know the policy differences between the two are significant. Dave?
Well, first of all, I'm in a state with uncontrolled spread right now, and I'm quite isolated and unhappy, and I want more to be talked about COVID, and I'm distressed that it's not. With regard to policy, Biden has an array of policy declarations that are very easy to read. They're there. We can get to them. We can understand them. We have those. We don't have that on the GOP side. And so what we end up, what I believe is we have policies versus personalities. And we have assertions quite broadly on the part of the president with regard to a second term and how good it's going to be. There's a planning joke in there, but I'm not going to tell it. And then there's and then we have Biden saying, well, the first thing I'm going to do is start listening to smart people. And that may be some kind of abdication of leadership, but it's also an acknowledgement that leaders need good people to help them solve problems. And so I'm looking forward personally to having senses that problems are being solved, starting with COVID.
Well, both sides have no particular interest in talking about specifics. So Donald Trump doesn't like talking about specifics generally, and is quite happy for this to be a referendum on him because, that's seems to be his worldview. So he hasn't really laid out any agenda for his second term beyond saying that he would rebuild the economy again. So the mantra is make America great again, I think. So on the Biden side, he doesn't particularly, if you don't have to be tied down to specifics, and all the problems that creates, why would you? So he's sort of danced around this whole topic of what he would do about the Supreme Court and did the ultimate politician shuffle, which is to say he would have a commission, which is essentially saying, I'm not going to decide now, and I'm certainly not going to tell you. And he actually said, I'm not going to tell you because it would just become the story of the moment if I told you, which in other times would seem like an extraordinary dodge, but right now sort of doesn't seem to have been particularly harmful to his prospects. So it really is, it's a referendum on people and personalities and on leadership. But just since we're talking about COVID, I can tell you that for what it's worth, Wilkes County is not a mask-wearing county, and it's a handshaking county. And you could walk around here and be largely, unless you go into a public building or, so the museum behind me, public space, the ladies there were all wearing masks. But, out on the street, I'm looking around, I haven't seen anyone wearing a mask walking around. Whereas if you go to other areas, we've been on this tour and everyone's wearing a mask, even if they're walking their dog on their own with no one around them. So totally different atmosphere on that side. And I spoke to people here who said, que sera, sera, basically, if I get sick, I'll get sick. And that's the deal. Now, this is not an area with a massive growth, although all areas have growth in the States. I think there's only 2 states where there's actually a decline in the number of cases for the moment. But this is not a particular hotspot, but it certainly doesn't seem to be front of mind with the people here beyond not wanting a lockdown and actually wanting just to get on with life and business.
I want to get a few more comments from people, but while we're talking about COVID, I do want to thank you, Malcolm. We've sent you on 6 different trips during a pandemic. So we're very grateful for you taking the risks on all our behalf. Lynn Maddock, let's get a comment from you and Caroline Sumnall as well, please. So Lynn, go ahead.
I found the dissonance between Christian values and Trump's actual behaviour is really fascinating, and the ability to cope with that dissonance. But I've really got a question, perhaps on notice for Dave for Monday. Last time we had the polls being confounded because there was underpolling in some states, and they were the ones that were the surprises on the night. Do you think that there are any states being underrepresented in polling this time? And if so, what are they?
Okay, I'm going to pop in really quickly. First of all, they're overpolling, not underpolling from what I can tell. And we just had in North Carolina, I believe I'm looking at 4 new polls today, if not 5, no 6. Ranging from really good polls to not so good polls, but lots of polling going on in these states. As to whether you're missing something, one of the problems with the previous polls were they weren't properly weighting the responses from a subset of the population that was turning out at a higher rate than they historically had and with more fervency, which was lower educated white people, especially males. And they have gone way overboard to try to correct those kinds of problems. So, you know, you hate to say this, but I really trust the average of the polling right now. It is way better or much better at the state level. At the national level, I think they did a good job last time and they're doing a great job now. But at the state level, I have more confidence in the polling averages than I now know I shouldn't have had 4 years ago.
And maybe if I could just have a stab at the whole evangelical and why they support Trump thing, or indeed any fervent Trump supporter. So it's my observation, and I'm no psychologist or particular expert on this, but it seems to me that he speaks to it's more of a question of identity. So that's why policy doesn't matter too much. And, you know, personality is forgivable when it has flaws. You know, there's a group of a segment of the country here that thinks that they have been largely ignored by mainstream politicians, and to the extent mainstream politicians paying attention to them, they sneer at them and look down their noses. So, you know, why would you vote for more of that if I'm to put myself in their shoes? And basically, when Donald Trump speaks, liberals' heads spin, and they like liberals' heads spinning because they think that's a good thing, you know, so more of that, please. So if that may explain, you know, that's my interpretation of what's going on here. I mean, from a man who, from my memory, has been to church in the course of his presidency, I think, well, if we ignore the Bible standing outside St. John's after the riot police had cleared the crowd, if we ignore that, I think he's been to church once. You know, there could have been other occasions where he's given a speech at church, but actually attending a service, I can think of one occasion, and he happened to be sort of going past and dropped in. So, you know, it does seem paradoxical, but that's my attempt to explain it.
Caroline, do you want to follow that up, Caroline?
Sure. So firstly, thank you for Shirley, because I was loving that. She was fantastic. My question is to our roving reporter, Malcolm. What has surprised you most on this journey so far with us over the last week or so?
I guess, you know, I am surprised by the extent to which you know, Republicans are prepared to concede that like I said earlier, his personality is a problem for them. I'd expected them to be a little more all in and not concede any flaws at this sort of vulnerable time. And I'm surprised by the extent, I mean, just the mobilization of the population that's going on. Another little thing that I should just mention, I've got two other things to mention, but just throwing forward to what we're going to talk about next week. I know just from personal experience that groups on both sides of the political spectrum are mobilizing to be in DC on election night, but more significantly, they are planning to stay after election night. So I know that spaces are being booked, squares are being booked, video equipment's being hired, jumbotrons are being reserved. So this speaks to a potential aftermath of this, which could go on, you know, much longer than election night. And certainly interest groups are preparing for that. And then just since you're all traveling, folks, and since it came up, the whole COVID thing that came up, I mean, it's not surprising to me perhaps, but it's interesting that you're constantly confronted with these decisions about, oh God, do I go into that restaurant or not? And you're sort of looking at people and how many people are wearing a mask. It's not, you can say, I'm gonna be as careful as I can be, but you're endlessly confronted with these small decisions. Someone approaches you with their hand out. Do you take their hand? You know, you want to talk to them? Do you not take their hand? So these minor decisions that you're constantly confronted with, it's very hard to be out in the world doing this right now and have a rigid set of well, I have found it hard to have a rigid set of guidelines. You know, it's hard to do. I keep a mask on me all the time and I wear it anytime I'm indoors in a building pretty much. A couple of occasions I've taken off when I'm speaking to someone and it seems like a big space, you know, but that's me just going, well, this seems to have a high ceiling. So that stuff is, you know, interesting and challenging since I know you're all traveling people.
Well, Malcolm, you can be sure you'll get lots of get well cards if you get COVID.
Thank you, Malcolm. Right. We really appreciate you doing it.
It's been fun, I should also say.
Sheila Conroy has got a last comment, and then we'll probably wrap up after that. Sheila, do you want to go ahead and make your go on?
Yes, I was surprised that for the first time, two people refused to answer a question. The first was the guy in the distillery who didn't want to tell you who he and his wife voted for. And then I think his name was Ian, the young Republican, who didn't want to let you know or let us know what his job or profession was. And that's, you know, my experience has always been that Americans can't wait to let you know who they are and what they earn and want to know about your job and so on. You know, very curious, but these two people didn't. And I wonder if that's representative of the area.
I wouldn't draw enormous general. I mean, Ian's, without giving away his confidence, he's a public servant, so I think I think that probably played a role in his decision. Knowing what his profession is, I understood that. It was interesting. Brian in the distillery had apparently been told by his wife not to let on, even though he was clearly a Trump supporter. So I don't know if I draw again a general conclusion about that, but you are right to say that for the most part, my experience having lived here for 20 plus years, Americans are like professional interviewees. I'm always astonished by what people will tell you if you approach them with a microphone, and it's very different cultures. I mean, I've done it in the UK and other parts of the world, and it's typically much easier here. It's like people have been to witness school somehow, and they're just very good at it.
I sometimes find rural areas, a bit quieter, people less brash, don't want to
yeah, I think
strangers. Although this is the home of NASCAR, which has to be the most brash thing going. Piers Reynolds, you had your hand up, so I'm not too sure if that was from earlier or just now. Piers.
No, just first of all, a general comment. That was like listening to members of the DUP party in Westminster, which is where I think North Carolina have very deep roots. But can I just go back to what David was talking about? Is there a possibility that by making so many adjustments to cover the mistakes in the polls, the local polls of 2016, that they may actually be overcompensating in the other direction? Because it's interesting to me that it all looks much tighter in the battleground states than nationally.
We don't know. No, they don't know, and they will defend themselves that they're applying the best procedures right now. And if you look at 538 polls, and if all you do is you look at the high level polls, yeah. I'm just stuck with, I have to have confidence in the A's and the B polls, and I'm just going to not look at the rest of them.
Okay. On Monday night, we are going to take you through some of the polls and also 538.com. If you don't know 538, you've got to go and look at it. And they've got a wonderful thing called a snake. And it goes from the states with the biggest Biden leads to the one with the smallest ones, and then over into the marginal states. And the snakes adds up to an electoral college victory. And that gives you an idea of the states to look out for on Tuesday. So we'll take you through that, as well as deal with some other issues that look ahead to Election Day and beyond that. My thanks to everyone. I've really enjoyed this series, enjoyed all 6 counties we've gone through. Thanks once again to Malcolm for driving, staying in the motels and getting out and about at some risk to himself. So we're all very grateful to that. And also thanks again to Dave Swenson for being on hand and commentating for each of our sessions. We've got one more on Monday night, and then we will be doing a review on the Wednesday after election. I'm betting that we will have a result after Election Day. I don't think it's going to be as tight or as confounded or as confused as some people are suggesting. Thank you very much indeed, everyone. Goodbye for now. See you again on Monday.